Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let us get started. World markets extended gains for the third consecutive week, supported by another batch of positive earnings in the US and Europe. Market indices in the US, Europe, China, and Japan erased most of the losses inflicted by the chaotic introduction of new tariff regime in the US. In addition, major central banks in the US, Norway, and Sweden held rates steady as expected, and the Bank of England lowered its rates, meeting the market expectations. Let us review key global economic data of this week, and we begin with the US. The U.S. Federal Reserve held steady the Fed fund rates target rate range between 4.25% and 4.5%. Fed Chair Powell, in post-decision comments, ruled out possibility of a preemptive rate cut ahead of the start of the tariffs. Powell added that the current tariff rates, when implemented, could slow down economic growth, spike inflation higher, and keep long-term unemployment even elevated. The U.S. trade deficit hit a new record high in March after businesses front-loaded ahead of the introduction of Trump tariffs. Exports increased 7% to $279 billion, and imports advanced 27% to $419 billion, driving the trade deficit higher by a whopping 100% from a year ago to $141 billion. Imports of consumer goods, electronics, apparel, and industrial intermediate products and raw materials soared ahead of the announced tariffs, with heaviest rates on shipment from China. Germany's seasonally and calendar-adjusted exports and imports advanced from the previous month and a year ago, and the trade surplus was stable. Exports increased just about 2.3% to 133 billion euros, and imports advanced by the same amount to 112 billion euros, resulting in a trade surplus of 21 billion euros. Exports to the US and China advanced but fell to the UK. US, China, and UK are the three leading trade partners of Germany. China's exports continue to advance in April despite the US tariffs and additional trade barriers. Exports in April advanced 8% to nearly $316 billion. Imports decreased 0.2% to $220 billion, resulting in a trade surplus increase of 33% from a year ago to $96 billion. Exports to the U.S. fell 21%, but global vehicle exports rose 11.5% in volume terms, with total sales increasing 4.4% to about $11 billion. China's trade surplus eased in April from March, but rose from a year ago as factories sold intermediate goods and raw materials to Chinese companies operating in the ASEAN region and in Vietnam and in Mexico. In other economic news, the central banks of Norway and Sweden held their benchmark rates, but the Bank of England cut its policy rate by 25 basis points, citing weakening inflationary forces. Japan's nominal household spending and nominal wages advanced in March, supporting the growth in consumer spending. However, inflation-adjusted real wages declined for the second consecutive year in the financial year ending in March. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury rebounded for the second week in a row to 4.37%, supported by improving global trade sentiment and diminished expectations of a near-term rate cuts. Texas crude oil prices advanced 6% to $61 a barrel as investors hope that the U.S.-China talks will ease trade tensions and avoid tit-for-tat tariffs that could slow down global economic growth. Natural gas prices in Europe jumped about 8% to 35 euros and 60 cents per megawatt hour after global trade tensions and demand uncertainty were outweighed by lawmakers lowering the storage refill target to 83% from the current 90% by November 1st. The euro stabilized at $1.13 as investors continue to view dollar-denominated assets with skepticism because of U.S. trade policy uncertainty. Yen weakened to 146 amid fading expectations of an imminent rate cut in the U.S. and in Japan. Let us shift our attention to major stock markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite extended gains for the third consecutive week as investors reviewed another batch of positive earnings and pinned their hopes on the Trump administration pursuing more stable trade policy. European markets extended gains for the fifth consecutive week, driven by positive earnings and expectations of a trade agreement with the U.S. that would avoid sky-high tariffs. The Nikkei 225 stock average extended gains for the fifth consecutive week in a holiday-shortened week after the increases in nominal household spending and wages in March raised hopes for a higher consumer spending. Hong Kong and China indices advanced after the People's Bank of China and Chinese Securities Regulatory Commission announced measures to stabilize financial markets and improve consumer confidence. Indian market indices halted three-week rally after tensions between India and Pakistan escalated following a retaliatory military strike after Pakistan-funded terrorists killed 26 tourists in Kashmir. We now shift our attention to merger deal, market movers, and earnings updates from leading companies last week. Berkshire Hathaway posted sharply lower earnings in the first quarter, impacted by a nearly 50% decline in insurance underwriting profit, and the company warned that tariffs may further hit profits. Cummins raised its dividend despite the decline in earnings for the latest quarter, and the provider of diesel and alternative fuel engines said that higher sales in China partially offset the decline. Advanced Micro Devices reported strong first quarter results and issued a positive outlook as data segment's revenue surged nearly 60%. Marriott International reported strong quarterly results, and the hotel chain operator is efficiently expanding its global business. The Walt Disney Company swung to a profit in the second quarter, and the media and resort company struck a deal with Miral to build a theme park and resort on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi, where the company will benefit from royalty. Uber Technologies swung to a profit in the first quarter, and the ride-hailing and delivery services company estimated a double-digit growth in gross bookings in the second quarter. Expedia said the first quarter net loss widened, impacted by weaker-than-expected demand in the U.S., yet the number of booking room nights increased by 6% from a year ago. Siemens Energy reported strong second quarter results, and the energy technology company announced a split of its business in India. Audi posted mixed first quarter results despite the German passenger car manufacturer registering high demand for electric vehicle deliveries. On Jenny, the China-based bubble tea retail chain store operator, raised $35 million in an initial public offering, and its stock soared more than 60% on the first day of trading in Hong Kong. In the week ahead, investors in the U.S. are looking ahead to the release of producer and consumer price inflation data, retail sales, and industrial production data. Moreover, investors are awaiting the release of updates on home construction activities, export and import prices, and foreign bond investment flows. On the earnings front, markets are awaiting the results from Cisco Systems, NRG Energy, Simon Property, Walmart, Alibaba Group, John Deere and Company, Applied Materials, Ross Stores, and Bath & Body Works. In Europe, investors are looking ahead to the release of UK's retail sales, unemployment rate, the Eurozone economic sentiment, and inflation reports from Germany, Spain, and Italy. On the earnings front in Europe, investors expect the results from Bayer, United Internet, Bank Millennium, Daimler Truck, Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, Allianz, Swiss Reinsurance, and Merck. In Asia, markets are looking ahead to the release of Japan's current account data, GDP growth data, and producer price inflation, India's inflation rate, and China's new household and business loans. On the earnings front, market expects the earnings results from Suzuki Motor, Mitsubishi Estate, Nippon Sanso Holdings, SoftBank Group, Tata Motors, Olympics Corp, Tencent Holdings, Sony Group, NetEase, and Samsung Life Insurance. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on Rodera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com. Review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see